So the one thing this budget, a post-pandemic crisis budget, provides greater clarity. Raghuram Rajan, focusing on this budget and looking at what next, the medium-term forecast and the short-term forecast beyond the budget, would you say this budget is more transparent than normal? I mean, in your analysis, can you explain what you feel are the hits and misses in this budget? It's clear that what they have actually put forward. First, on the hits, what are the positives in this budget?
Well, first, I think transparency, which you mentioned, is important, and coupled with that, I think as important is restraint. Earlier budgets, you saw the day the budget was announced, numbers didn't make any sense. The kind of optimism that was built into the budget was just off the scale. So you knew the revised budgets and the re-revised budgets would finally recognize the truth, but closer to the end of the year rather than the beginning of the year. And so these were really, in some sense, make-believe budgets. I think this budget has been more careful in both recognizing some of the off-balance sheet items, such as the Food Corporation of India spending, but also being a little more modest in its projections, so much so that if we don't see a recurrence of the virus, etc., and for every country, it's always modulo the virus.
I just think from all experience, economics is a really uncertain subject. In any case, you get 3 economists in a room and you'll get 5 different forecasts. And if there are 3 Bengali economists, you'll get 20 forecasts. Sorry, don't quote me on that. To add to the uncertainty of economics, we now have economics and the uncertainty of COVID, because it's amazing how many divergent views there are on the coronavirus, which no one really still fully understands. So the combination of 2 uncertainties, we're in deep trouble. Uncertainty of economics and the uncertainty of this new virus.
Right. So I think it's with the modulo our growth performance probably going to be better than what the budget presumes, and the buoyancy in taxes is also going to be higher than what the budget presumes. So in that sense, there is some space the budget has for which is greater than the normal year. So those are certainly good things in terms of transparency. I think in terms of laying out some ambition, including raising more resources through privatization, etc., I think those are useful. What is absent there is detail, and detail is really important because how you privatize matters as much as the intent to privatize. So we can come to that in a second. I think the spending on infrastructure that has been announced is also important because infrastructure tends to lift growth across the economy. I would love to see more resources, and there's been some delegated to the states so that the states can also spend. There is more, a little more room given to them. But I think that's on the positive side. Some ambition, some transparency.
Abhijit Banerjee, I know that by and large you do not like to discuss budgets. I know that. But just give us an overview, if you could, about this budget and what makes it different from the rest. What's your view about this latest budget that we've just had?
In many ways, the budget has the one big, obvious, advantage and rare advantage of being quite coherent. The budget makes takes a very clear view of what it wants to do. I think it may or may not get there, but I think clarity is a good first step. And I think there is clarity here. It's a very much a supply side budget. There is really, despite, for example, the enormous turmoil in agriculture, really, the subsidies are mostly kept constant. There's no attempt to provide extra money to anything except, for example, the APMCs are going to be upgraded, this construction money. And construction is at the heart of this budget. It's the construction of the textile hubs, the construction of highways and other roads.
Just getting back to the thrust of this budget, at least it has clear direction. Now, of course, everything depends on the ability to implement the budget ideas on the ground. In fact, it all boils down to just three things now: implementation, implementation, and implementation.
So all of that, I think, it's a coherent plan. I'm less convinced it will work, but at least to give credit to the government, it has gone against the grain of throwing money, a little bit of money at many things, a tax, this little tax, that little other thing, etc. Mostly it hasn't done that. The fact that the pensioners don't have to file, etc. Those are probably those you get very little money from. Most of the people who are just getting pension and have no asset income, you're getting very little money from them. So you might as well not bother with that. And overall, I think it's a very consistent supply side budget.
So with the budget focusing on infrastructure in general and specifically on construction, isn't that a positive move in terms of both what the country needs as well as what the poor and the most vulnerable need at this time? Or is it a little long term? But will it have immediate effects?
That's at the heart of the budget. It's not a crazy theory, because I've been saying this for many years, that construction is actually the heart of the transmission of earnings from the urban sector to the rural sector. So if you are someone who didn't get a great education because the school system failed you for one reason or another, and you show up in the city, what job do you get? A lot of those jobs are in construction. That's one place where you can make 400 rupees a day, and in Mumbai. And if you make 400 rupees a day, you can send 8,000 rupees back a month or something if you're very frugal. So it's really a big deal for people, and that was, I think, one of the key drivers of the urban to rural transmission. The reason why poverty in the years between 2010 and 16, poverty continues to fall. Even the economy is slowing, continues to fall in Bihar and UP, actually big fall in poverty. It's because of there's still construction going on. And when construction slows, that's absolutely critical sort of bind for the rural economy. So I think it's not crazy to think of construction as being a driver of a form of growth, a way to get demand regenerated. You get more jobs for construction. People come to the city, they spend money in the city. Their families spend money in the villages, etc. So so I think they have put construction front and center.
Any thoughts on some other significant aspects that you find in this budget besides construction?
It's just that's where all the real action of this budget is. And when they say we are going for long term, they really mean very much construction. And so that's I would say is and then they haven't, in real terms, NREGA, health, education, health, if you leave out COVID-19 specific spending, all of these are flat. They're not pretending to do anything about them, anything special. And in some ways, I feel that we often do the opposite, and I've always a little bit hated the opposite, which is that, we put 3,000 crores for something that is really, nobody's put any thought into it. But it's going to make, say that we did this for education and that for health, and they haven't gone there. Sort of the only place where they think education is a little bit is in skilling. That's the one place which gets emphasized a little bit, though I don't actually understand fully how much they plan to do about it. And I don't know that there is much to do about it that we know of. I mean, there is a lot to do about it, but we don't actually have a good diagnosis of why skilling has failed so far, or at least we don't have a diagnosis that people agree on. So my sense is that, again, not much will happen there.
Coming to you, Kaushik Basu, and looking beyond the budget for a moment at the short-term future for India, maybe next year and then even 2 years or even 3 years from now, what are the key issues post the budget that either worry you or make you feel better?
Yeah. Prannoy, on the whole, I felt the budget was a strong budget on the whole.
Right.
So that part did give me good vibes. There are details into which I can go, which I did not like, but on the whole, I think it's the right signals it gave. But nevertheless, I am very worried. And for that, yes, I will speculate about what lies ahead, but you have to go a little bit back as well. You know, right now, the year that has just ended, for which the Economic Survey has given out data, and we know a lot, 2020, you know, India's growth did plunge, and it plunged in a way that few other countries did. So it is not just a question of the COVID. Yes, the whole world did worse, but India, and this is IMF's, if you take the cross-country chart, India last year was the 164th fastest growing country in the world. Not in the top 3, but the 164th among 193 countries. And you'll get some differences if you look different clusters, but everywhere. India's in the bottom 20% of the world, which for India is shocking because a couple of years ago, India was right there on top. So we are talking about, though the budget did give good vibes, we are worried.
Yep, the fact that the budget focused on infrastructure, spoke about privatization and using the word for the first time instead of the usual word disinvestment. So in a nutshell, the budget talks about supply side to try and boost the economy. But perhaps the budget does not do enough or much on the demand side. Any thought on what India needs right now in the context of focusing specifically on supply side versus focusing more on demand side stimulus?
Yes, I do have some thoughts on that. And I do feel actually some of those moves were actually correct moves in the budget. I don't think that's going to correct for the economic ills because, as I said, it has many roots, but those are small correct moves. So overall, I actually like the moves that took place in the budget. And infrastructure, you rightly pointed out. There was one small mistake, which is the rural development schemes allocation has been cut by 5%. This is not the time when that should have been done, but it's a huge, big budget. There were many positives.
Right, so India now seems to be on a return to a regime of higher import tariffs, import duties. That's the new trend. Arvind Subramanian, former chief economic advisor, then at Harvard and now coming to Ashoka University, spoke to us about some excellent work that he and his co-author has done on this. And raising import tariffs could hurt our exports also. He shows that in India there has been a sudden massive hike in raising import duties. While in the normal course of the economy, India has either not raised import duties at all in some years or has on average raised import duties about 150 items a year. That's on average. Then suddenly, and this is the worrying part, in 2017-18, import tariffs were raised on as many as 2,460 items. And the key factor that Arvind Subramanian points out is that trade is important for India. Not many others have recognized this important factor, particularly the importance of exports in the Indian economy. Arvind Subramanian has shown that over the years, the growth rate of exports has been the third fastest in the world after only Vietnam and China. Not many knew that. Now it's crucial that this momentum must not be lost. Trade is and has been an important factor in India's development. Tampering with this aspect of our economy is a concern, isn't it, Abhijit?
Yeah, that's the worry. That's the number one worry is, I think, that, which is that, you know, we want to restart investment, and investment is stuck across the economy. And the two things that this budget does, which I don't think, one is it doesn't do much for demand. I'll come back to that. And the other is it actually puts tariffs on some of the industries where we are we were actually doing well in manufacturing till about 2014, 2015, manufacturing exports. We were this was our great period of manufacturing export expansion actually, which has slowed down partly because of, I think, a more inward looking view. And we've reinforced that where, I think, for example, motor parts are part of our, importing them and then building them into other things and re-exporting them is part of what we do. And those are all places where I think that we're going to be hurt. So I'm not convinced that that's going to help us, find more markets for our products. I think I think that one lesson we learned in 1991 was that exports actually do respond to people allowing you to import. That's a big lesson we learned.
The other negative trend in our economy, which unfortunately has not been reversed in this budget, is that Indian imports and exports growth has been declining. With this new volatility in import tariffs, that could be a worry.
I've never been a big votary of zero tariffs, but I think that as you constantly, fidget with the prices, you get discouragement of the exporters. A flat, stable tariff regime, even if it's not zero tariffs, you can plan for and you plan to build this and that, etc. I feel like the government has gone into this kind of fidgeting with tariffs, which we used to do a lot in the 80s. This comes from 60% to 47%, etc. That's a bad habit in my view. So I think we're kind of re-embracing that. We should commit to a very clear landing path for tariffs for like 10 years or something and just stick to it. I think it's much better. People can plan for it and it doesn't have to be zero if you want to, if it's either politically costly or you have to protect some people who are the workers in the sector or whatever, but it can, I think this, unpredictability of it, this one gets it, this one doesn't, etc. That's not a good environment for investment. That's point number one. The export-oriented investment.
Raghuram Rajan, you have been following our trade policy very closely as well. Is there a perceptible shift in India's approach?
The sins of commission are, some of the traditional, we've raised tariffs again across the board. I said one of our solutions to our growth problem is the outside world. If we don't have a lot of fiscal space ourselves to spend to stimulate, we need to let exports drive us out of this, pull us out of this problem. We have a chance of increasing exports, especially as countries wary of China and want to move their supply chains elsewhere. But the way to attract them, yes, these production-linked schemes, it's interesting and let's see how they play out. But the way to attract them is not to impose a consistent menu of higher tariffs. Let's keep tariffs relatively low and encourage the supply chains to come here because they see not so much handouts from the government, but they see a productive environment where they can produce well. That, to my mind, is one of the worries in terms of misses that we have. Why we're going back to the old tariff structure. It's certainly a budget with some good stuff and some not so good stuff.
Now you mentioned the positives. What did you mean when you said the not so good stuff in this budget?
I think on the sort of concern side, which we don't know enough, is on combating the virus. It is extremely important we use whatever good luck we've had in the virus coming down to do vaccination on a war scale. If we can vaccinate the population, we avoid the second wave, which is what is plaguing every other country. Now, I hear all the stories about how India is unique in many ways and how we're doing wonderful things, but I worry when I see a lot of people unmasked walking in Bangalore and Chennai, and I worry that we have a recurrence if these really virulent forms of the virus come back in. And so we need to vaccinate really fast. And that is a public good. So I would make it free, vaccinate anybody I can find, using the wonderful sort of facilities we have that are producing vaccines. And I would do that as fast as possible.
Yes, that's absolutely crucial. And moving on from the issues related to COVID to primarily economic issues, have there been any sins of omission?
I think the sort of concerns extend now to spending. We just talked about spending on the poorer households. That, to my mind, is shrinking rather than expanding. The government put out a lot last year, but it may need to continue putting out this year. I don't see that listed. Education, I worry about, that spending is remaining flat. But actually, we'll have to spend more on education, certainly on a lot of remedial stuff, to bring our kids back online, back to where they were. And I worry we risk a lost generation if we don't actually tackle that problem seriously. But then that there are, sins of, those were sins of omission.